The ocean had always called to David, but tonight it wasn't the usual soothing whisper of the waves that echoed in his mind. It was something darker, something older, crawling out from the depths of a place where the light had never touched. It was a song, an eerie, wordless melody that seemed to slip between reality and dream. No matter how hard he tried to ignore it, the song grew louder with each passing minute, pulling at his thoughts like the tide pulling a body beneath the surface. David stood on the edge of the cliff, staring into the endless blackness of the sea below. The jagged rocks jutted out like the fangs of some monstrous creature waiting to devour anything that fell into its mouth. Yet, it wasn't the threat of the fall that terrified him. It was the song, sweet, seductive, and filled with an insatiable hunger. The sound felt like it was coming from beneath the waves, as though the ocean itself were alive, calling him home. He clutched his head, trying to silence the maddening tune, but it was no use. The wind howled around him, but it was drowned out by the growing crescendo of the abyssal melody. His feet inched closer to the cliff's edge, as if driven by a force beyond his control. A sickeningly sweet voice whispered his name. His breath hitched, his heart pounding painfully in his chest. He wanted to turn back, to run, but his legs betrayed him, moving steadily forward. The moon hung high, casting a pale light over the ocean's surface. For a moment, he thought he saw something. No, someone beneath the water, a shadow, dark and shapeless, moving with unnatural grace just beneath the waves. He blinked, but the shadow was still there, clearer now. A hand broke the surface, pale as bone, its fingers long and crooked, clawing at the air as if beckoning him closer. The song grew louder, piercing his mind like shards of glass. David's heart raced. His mind screamed to turn away, but his body, driven by something primal and irresistible, moved toward the cliff's edge. The hand reached higher, and he could see it clearly now, a grotesque figure, half human, half something else, slithering up from the depths. Its eyes were voids of nothingness. Its mouth stretched unnaturally wide as the song poured out, thick and foul like a plague. He stumbled, catching himself just before falling over the edge, but the creature's presence was now undeniable. Its face, twisted and decayed, bore the remains of a smile, an ancient, malevolent grin that promised agony beyond death. Its song clawed into his soul, each note carving away his sanity, leaving only fear and despair. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rot and brine, the stench of death long forgotten beneath the ocean's surface. He gagged, feeling bile rise in his throat, but he couldn't look away. The creature's eyes locked onto his, and he felt the coldness of the abyss wrap around him like a vice. The song shifted, no longer sweet, but harsh, discordant, a scream masquerading as music. He heard more than just the notes now. He heard voices of those who had come before him, souls claimed by the song, their hollow wails blending with the cursed melody. They spoke of endless drowning, of sinking into darkness where light never existed, of being trapped in a watery tomb with no escape. Their screams echoed in his mind, desperate and filled with anguish. And still, the creature climbed. Its body was serpentine, slick with seawater, its skin covered in barnacles and seaweed, as though it had been one with the ocean for centuries. It moved closer, its voice merging with the song in a horrific duet of death. David's legs trembled, the pull of the abyss undeniable. Suddenly, he realized the song was no longer just in his head. It was everywhere, filling the night air, reverberating through the earth beneath his feet. The cliffs, the ocean, the very sky seemed to hum with its cursed tune. The song wanted him, craved him, and he knew, deep down, that it would never stop until it had devoured him whole. As the creature's hand reached for him, its touch cold and wet, David's mind began to unravel. The song twisted around his thoughts, suffocating his will, dragging him into the depths of madness. He screamed, but no sound escaped his lips. The ocean song had taken everything, and the abyss waited, its mouth open wide, ready to swallow him. The cold, slimy fingers of the creature grazed David's arm, and a paralyzing chill shot through his body. He wanted to pull away, to escape the icy grip, but his muscles refused to obey. He was frozen in place, standing on the precipice of the cliff as the song drilled deeper into his mind. The creature's touch wasn't just cold, it was draining, like it was siphoning the life from him, feeding on his very essence. He felt weaker, more hollow with every passing second. The creature's face, now fully visible in the moonlight, was worse than anything he had ever imagined. Its features were human enough to be recognizable, but twisted beyond anything natural. Its skin hung loosely on its frame, as though it had been underwater for far too long, bloated and pale. Black, empty eyes gazed at him, reflecting the abyss from which it had come. The smile never left its cracked lips, revealing sharp, jagged teeth that glistened with sea foam. "Come," the creature whispered, its voice merging with the song, a sickening harmony of death and despair. The deep awaits. David's legs moved again, this time stepping closer to the edge without any resistance from his mind. His heart hammered in his chest, but his body was no longer his own. The surrounding air seemed to thicken, as if the very atmosphere was pulling him down. He could feel the weight of the ocean, the crushing pressure of the deep, even though he still stood on dry land. The abyss was calling him, and he couldn't resist. Another step. The wind howled louder now, carrying with it the voices of the dead, the souls of those who had fallen victim to the song before him. Their wails were like nails on a chalkboard, a cacophony of pain and sorrow that blended seamlessly with the melody. He could almost see them now, shadows swirling in the darkness beneath the waves, their hollow eyes watching, waiting for him to join them in eternal torment. Another step. The jagged rocks below were a death sentence, sharp and unforgiving. But David knew that the fall wasn't what awaited him. No, something far worse lurked beneath the water's surface. The ocean was alive with malice, the waves moving unnaturally, like the surface of a hungry beast, writhing and waiting for its next meal. The creature's grip tightened, its claws digging into his skin, drawing blood. The sting of pain barely registered in David's mind as his thoughts spiraled deeper into the song. The abyss was so close now, he could feel it in every bone, in every breath. The deep would claim him, as it had claimed so many before. Another step, and he was on the very edge. The creature's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, its jaws stretching inhumanly as it prepared to swallow him whole. David's breath came in short, ragged gasps. His mind screamed for release, for an escape from this nightmare. But it was too late. The abyss had him, body and soul. The final note of the song pierced the air, shrill and violent. It felt like a physical force, slamming into his chest, knocking the last remnants of resistance from his body. His foot lifted, hovering above the void. But before he could plunge into the darkness, the ground beneath him shifted. The cliffside crumbled, rocks and earth giving way, as though the land itself was rejecting him. David's heart skipped a beat as he stumbled backward, away from the edge. The creature hissed, its smile fading as it clung to him, desperate to pull him into the abyss. David fell to the ground, scrambling back on his hands and knees as the creature's grip slipped from his arm. The song screeched, no longer melodic, but angry, a furious wail of hunger denied. The ocean below roared in response, waves crashing violently against the rocks, sending spray high into the air. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched, but something held it back. David could see the desperation in its dead eyes as it clawed at the air, unable to cross the threshold between the cliff and the abyss. The song faltered, its power weakened as David crawled farther from the edge. For a moment, he thought he was free, that he had somehow escaped the clutches of the abyss. But as he scrambled to his feet, gasping for breath, he realized the truth. The song wasn't gone. It had only just begun. From the shadows beneath the waves, more shapes began to emerge, dozens of them, pale and twisted, crawling up from the depths. Their voices joined the song, each one adding a new layer of horror to the cursed melody. The creature on the cliff still smiled, its jagged teeth glinting in the moonlight as it faded back into the darkness, leaving David alone with the chorus of the damned. The abyss had many hands, many voices, and it would never stop until it had claimed him. David turned and ran, the song echoing in his mind, growing louder with every step. But no matter how far he fled, the abyss would follow, its haunting melody forever etched into his soul. And somewhere, deep beneath the waves, the song continued, waiting for its next victim. David sprinted through the darkened forest, his breath ragged, each inhale cutting through his lungs like shards of glass. The song followed him, relentless, echoing from the ocean behind him, growing louder with each passing second. It was no longer just a melody in his mind. It was everywhere. The trees seemed to hum with the cursed tune, their branches swaying in sync with the rhythm, the very earth beneath his feet vibrating with its sinister pulse. But David knew he couldn't outrun it. The ground became treacherous, the roots and rocks rising up as if trying to trip him, to drag him back into the waiting maw of the abyss. The forest, once familiar, now twisted into something foreign, something hostile. The path was gone, swallowed by the shadows that stretched unnaturally in every direction. He was running in circles, lost in the dark, while the song closed in like a tightening noose. He stumbled, falling to his knees. His hands dug into the dirt, wet and cold beneath his fingers, but he had no strength left to stand. The cursed melody was inside him now, burrowing deeper into his thoughts, controlling his every breath, his every movement. His limbs felt heavy, as though they were no longer his own. The abyss was calling him back. Then, from the darkness, the first of the creatures emerged. Their bodies, pale and bloated, slithered from between the trees, crawling toward him on twisted, broken limbs. Their mouths gaped open in silent screams, their eyes hollow and black, empty voids that reflected the same endless hunger of the ocean. They were the lost souls, the ones who had been claimed by the abyss before him, their humanity stripped away, leaving only empty vessels for the song. David tried to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. The creatures crawled closer, their movements unnatural and jerky, their hands reaching for him. They didn't speak, but their mouths moved in time with the song, as though they were part of the same cursed chorus. He could feel their cold, decayed fingers brushing against his skin, pulling him closer to them, to the endless darkness from which they came. "No, no," David whispered, his voice weak, barely audible over the song. But it was too late. The largest of the creatures, the one from the cliffside, slithered forward, towering over him. Its twisted smile had returned, a grotesque parody of joy, as its cold, dead eyes locked onto his. The song swelled, louder and more vicious than before, the final note of his doom. The creature's hand reached for him, its claws digging into his shoulder, and this time, there was no escape. David felt his body lift from the ground, as though the very air had become the hands of the abyss, pulling him down, down into the endless void. The forest melted away, replaced by the icy black waters of the ocean. He was falling, sinking beneath the waves, the cold water filling his lungs, choking the life from him. The song was everywhere now, surrounding him, suffocating him as he sank deeper and deeper into the depths. He thrashed, his hands clawing at the water, but it was useless. The abyss had claimed him. The darkness closed in, thick and unyielding, pressing against his body from all sides. His lungs burned, the last breath of air slipping away as the weight of the deep crushed him. Above, the surface was a distant, unreachable memory, the moonlight a mere sliver of hope that was quickly fading into oblivion. And then, just as his vision blurred, and his body went numb, he saw them, thousands of eyes, glowing faintly in the blackness. The creatures of the abyss, the true masters of the deep, waiting for him at the bottom of the ocean. Their grotesque forms slithered in the darkness, ancient and terrible, their bodies twisting and writhing in the black water. They had waited centuries, perhaps millennia, for another soul to join them. David's body sank into the cold, slimy embrace of the abyss. His thoughts slowed, the song becoming a lullaby as the creatures closed in, their twisted mouths opening in a final, welcoming grin. The last thing David felt before the darkness consumed him entirely was the cold, wet hand of the creature pulling him into the eternal depths. And then there was nothing, just the song and the silence of the deep. The abyss had won, and its song would never end.